Okay, so I'm just going to make an update on some of the latest developments as I've seen them on Brexit and all the fallout from this. If I repeat anything I'm saying, please accept my apologies. There's a lot going on and a lot of important issues at stake. Also, a quick disclaimer about my previous videos. If I happen to, I'll be uploading some more videos in the coming days that were actually recorded before this was, but because this is such a topical issue, I may be uploading this first. In other words, the sort of chronology of some of my other videos may seem a bit out of place. So if I'm talking about something like today, and it may not actually be that day, I may not even upload all of those for that reason. But anyway, I want to just discuss some of the issues here. There has been a lot going on. Apparently, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove have been in talks today over presumably what's going to happen with the Conservative leadership contest. David Cameron's been Tory leader for 11 years. Unless I'm mistaken, that's one of the longest periods. I think only Lord Salisbury, the Earl of Derby, Margaret Thatcher, and I was going to say Winston Churchill, but actually Churchill was only Tory leader, unless I'm mistaken, during the time he was Prime Minister. No, no, that's wrong. So yeah, Lord Salisbury, the Earl of Derby, Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill. Unless I'm mistaken, the only Tory leaders who have held the role longer than Cameron. Not sure about Sir Robert Peel, how long he was actually Tory leader for, but 11 years is quite a while. Um, I still remember when he became leader. That was broadly the time I was starting to get into party politics, 2005. Um, I'll speak more about the particular leadership election as it approaches closer. Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, has also been mentioned as a possible leader. I can't see that happening. She's not really known nationally, and the bookies aren't favouring her. But we'll see closer to the time. If I were a betting man at this point, I'd say Boris Johnson, but that would be a very safe bet. There may well be a dark horse, though, that enters this, or a dark mare. We'll see what happens. Um, Johnson's obviously a very colourful figure. I think yeah, that would get a lot of attention. I just want to speak a little bit about some of the actual results in this referendum. The total results for Leave were about 17.41 million. The total results for Remain were about 16.14 million, which amounts to 51.9% and 48.1% respectively. So it wasn't an overwhelming victory for Leave, but it was a comfortable victory. The most Eurosceptic seats in the country were Boston, which is a market town in Lincolnshire, 76% for Leave, followed by South Holland, also in Lincolnshire, Castle Point, I believe that is in West Yorkshire, Thurrock in Essex, Great Yarmouth, Fenland, which I believe is in Norfolk, Mansfield, Nottinghamshire, Bolsover, Derbyshire, East Lindsey, again Lincolnshire, and North East Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire as a county is very Eurosceptic. I think one reason being there has been a big influx of East Europeans to that particular county. And when you get big demographic shift in a particular area, it has an impact. Um, as for the most pro-Europe seats, that has been East Renfrewshire, which was they're actually going by the lowest Leave votes as opposed to the highest Remain. East Renfrewshire just 26% for Leave. Edinburgh, City of Edinburgh to be precise. Camden, Wandsworth, Islington, City of London, Haringey, Hackney, Lambeth, and Gibraltar. So most of those are London seats and Scotland. That's not too surprising. I was surprised by Birmingham. It was one of the few big cities that voted out, although it was very, very tight in Birmingham. In fact, the exact figure for Birmingham was 223,000 for Remain, 227,000 for Leave. Very, very close. That's a difference of just about 3 or 4 thousand. Um, this is actually the electoral map of the United Kingdom right now. Excuse me. Not sure how clear that is, but you can see, just like previous general elections, there's a big, big gulf between Scotland and Northern Ireland and most of England. Within England, the Remain side tended to be big cities, particularly London and Wales. Wales was a bit mixed, but it was a little bit more similar to England, as opposed to Northern Ireland and Scotland. In the case of Northern Ireland and Scotland, actually, the Times has Northern Ireland as one entity, which is slightly misleading because some of the counties in Ulster were more divided. But nevertheless, it was for Remain. That was probably Sinn Féin, Alliance, Green voters in Northern Ireland. The DUP, unless I'm mistaken, is quite Eurosceptic. Scotland, every seat was pro Remain. Of course, that doesn't mean that the whole of Scotland is enthusiastically pro Europe. There were Leave voters in Scotland as well. Now, I want to talk about several issues. I already mentioned David Cameron. There's not more much to be said about that. Today, Boris Johnson got his share of heckling from Leave voters. One of the major issues that is developing is this petition for another referendum. It's already reached almost 3 million people. Now, I haven't signed that. I'm a Remain voter. I haven't signed that. The reason I haven't signed that is because I'm not sure what it would lead to. I find it very hard to believe that any of the leaders would put themselves through this bruising campaign again. Um, and you know, if it does go ahead, then the Leave voters will be angry and they'll just say, "Well, wait a second, you're disregarding our democratic will." Um, the people organising this campaign are doing it on the grounds that it was relatively close, and that turnout was less than 75%. I believe it was 72%. Now, that's actually quite a good turnout. It's higher than most general elections. Nevertheless, the point that they're contending is that if you take absolute popular votes and the turnout factor and all that, then there is not actually a democratic mandate to leave. They're also arguing that the majority of MPs chose to remain. I believe only about a quarter of MPs chose to be on the leave side. So that's their argument. I'm a little bit skeptical of that going ahead. Firstly, it will only divide the country further. The leave side will say it's arrogant and basically being a sore loser. Also, I don't think the European Union would accept it. I think they'll just say, "What are the Brits playing at? They vote out, now they're voting back in again." They would say we're just disrupting the system. And there are European politicians in other countries who are saying, "Let's just get this over and done with and leave as fast as possible." Some of the leading Brexiteers don't want that because they want the best possible settlement. Now, Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland is pushing for a second Scottish referendum, which was inevitable. Um, I'm very unhappy about that. Not that I believe it would necessarily happen, but it's just going to divide the country further. And by the country, I mean both Scotland and the United Kingdom. Um, the people of Scotland, I'm sure, like the rest of the country, are tired of referendums, but she's determined to have it. And there is some irony. Although I'm a Remain voter, you can't help but point out the irony that she wants to break up the United Kingdom and her party wants to break up the United Kingdom, and they're preaching about independence, yet they want to be part of a union where they're tied to 27 other countries. Now, I am pro Remain, I am in favour, and ultimately I voted for building a bridge with 27 other countries. I do think we're going to have a period of great uncertainty. And world reaction, I have to say, I've seen it. What I've seen so far has been almost unanimously cynical about this decision that we've left. Now, that's not to say that people in other countries have a right to decide British destiny, but we should still listen to what our international friends, colleagues, trading partners are saying. And not just the politicians, most ordinary people in other countries are also dealing this in a skeptical way. I'm not saying it's everyone, but does seem to be overwhelming. Like, what have the British done? Um, every American, every Frenchman, French person, I should say, every Italian, every German, every Chinese are treating this with skepticism. I mean, That I'm just talking about the people I've seen. I'm not saying it is everyone, but it's going to be an ugly divorce. I think this idea that UKIP has that it's going to be a smooth divorce is it's going to be very complex and very ugly. And I don't envy David Cameron's job this week. He's going to have to go to that meeting in Brussels, and I really sympathise with the man because he's despised in a way by both sides, or at least being blamed by both sides. I again reiterate, I think it's absurd to call him a traitor, given that he's the prime minister who has put this referendum to the country. What I do find interesting is there are reports of a large number of Leave voters are immediately regretting the decision and questioning why they've done it. Obviously, there will be the voters who are very hardcore anti-Europe and they see it as a great thing, but there is some cynicism coming from certain Leave voters that I find quite unfortunate. This man was interviewed in, I believe it was Scarborough or Scunthorpe, I can't remember which, but David Cameron was there today for a World War II event. And he was sitting there and saying, "Oh, they're all the same. All the politicians are the same. We done this to stand up to the politicians." Well, firstly, it's a bit of a sweeping statement because there was politicians for Leave. So if that's his position, you're only standing up to a certain group of politicians. But I also think it shows, frankly, and I might come across in a bad way here, but a certain piss ignorance of some of my compatriots, who basically get their information from the Sun, and they just can't be bothered to look a little bit deeper into issues. This is coming, and people will say Joe Cox shouldn't be mentioned. I disagree. I think this idea that the man who assassinated Joe Cox was just a deranged, lone nut, it's it's problematic because the sort of sentiments that led to her brutal death are out there. They are out there, and it is not just one fringe figure. There are many people who basically hate politicians, and I wouldn't put past some of them to use violence. This is very toxic, and we need to speak up against it. People have a right to be angry with politicians, but the public need to understand, and I'm including myself in this, we have responsibility. Let's stop blaming everything on politicians. So Leave voters who are now saying, "Oh, we were lied to," let's blame the Leave leaders. Take some responsibility. You chose to vote Leave. That was your choice. No one forced you to do it. That was your choice. So take some responsibility. Don't blame Michael Gove and Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. Just take responsibility. The information was presented to you. No one can complain that we had a lack of information. We were bombarded with information. And I know it was a difficult decision, but we are all responsible for the decision that we made, myself included. If this turns out to be a very great decision, Britain is a much better country in 5 years, I'll think, well, yeah, maybe the Leave side were right and I was wrong. I'm not going to blame anyone for the choice that I made as an adult, as a voter. I really do think that if the politics of this year has taught us anything as a nation, it is that we, as people, are responsible for the choices that we make. We cannot blame everything on politicians. So I get a little bit tired of that attitude. Um, I will say one thing though about some of my fellow Remain voters, and I will also say something to my fellow Europeans who are looking at the British in a certain light. Anyone who thinks this is about a lot of angry racists voting out are hugely misguided. There were many reasons people voted out. I personally know people who are intelligent, who have travelled the world, who are from a diverse range of backgrounds. There are Black Britons who have voted out. There are Asian Britons who have voted out. Um, in fact, Gazella Stewart, who was one of the prominent Leave MPs, is of German extract. So to simply dismiss the entire Leave side as being about racism is absurd. Unfortunately, it has attracted some outright racists, and there's no denying that there are people in this country who are piss ignorant and they want to blame all the problems that we face on immigrants. That's wrong. It's wrong because pressure on public services um, is largely the culpability of this Tory government and its harsh austerity program. I mean, where you have the most deprived areas, you also have the strongest anti-immigrant sentiment, and it's absurd to blame that on immigrants. I think it's misguided, and it's a big mistake when you have a big influx of people on those deprived areas. That inevitably adds fuel to the fire. Um, and when it comes to the issue of immigration, I believe I've got a very balanced outlook because I don't sort of think maybe I should leave this for another video, but yeah, I'll leave it for another video. But I just want to say that anyone who thinks all Leave voters are narrow-minded racists, you're in your own way just as extreme as those who attack all immigrants. It's not that simple. It's really, really not. Um, I will say that Jeremy Corbyn gave an interesting speech, and it's the first time, and I'm not saying it's the only time he's done it, but it is the first time I've heard him acknowledge that immigration is an important issue. And it's the first time I've heard Jeremy Corbyn acknowledge that there are too many in the left who simply dismiss concerned about it as being about, racism. Now, it's good that he's acknowledged that, but in my opinion, he should have done that earlier on. Jeremy Corbyn is a hard left figure, and many of his statements are basically from hard left ideology. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is an intelligent man, and he's always measured in his speeches. I mean, he's biased. He is a left wing figure with a left wing worldview, but I don't think he's an idiot. I really, really don't. I just think he's kind of trapped by his own very partisan views. I mean, you can't say he's a centrist figure. He's not. Um, his own job, of course, is on the line. I will say one thing, though, in defense of Jeremy Corbyn. And, I too thought, well, why is he being low profile in this campaign? There are people who are accusing him of being a Judas because he went for Remain and much of his life he's been a Eurosceptic. I will say one thing though. I think one reason Jeremy Corbyn hasn't got media attention is because Jeremy Corbyn is actually quite responsible with his words. He doesn't always come out with outlandish, sweeping statements. He hasn't said stupid things the way both sides have done. He hasn't said we're going to see World War III. He hasn't said that the EU is a dictatorship or anything like that. He's been quite responsible with his words. Maybe that's the reason he hasn't got media attention. Because quite frankly, the media love politicians to say extreme statements. It gives them fuel. It gives them cause to have big glaring headlines, Daily Mail style. So maybe that's one issue, where the press have been unfair on Jeremy Corbyn. Although I do understand those who are saying that he's lacking conviction because he has basically pandered to the Blairites in the party in terms of this EU referendum. I think he would have probably got more credit had he just been, frankly, with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. But then we get into the partisan nonsense that is up in Scotland. And the Nationals will say, oh, look, Jeremy Corbyn's yet another red Tory. And this is why I really, really have contempt for what the SNP does. They are the most hostile party in British politics, parties working together. So for all Nicola Sturgeon says that she wants to reach out, her party is guilty of constantly stirring up sectarianism. If Jeremy Corbyn or any other Labour figure worked with a Tory or worked with any other political party, they would be yelling, oh look, they're all Westminster parties, they're all the same. So the SNP is completely hypocritical in this regard. They're a very, very, very partisan and sectarian party by their very nature. Personally, I think we as British nationals need to welcome parties working together and, leaders working together. What is wrong with Jeremy Corbyn sharing a platform with David Cameron? I think the reason he hasn't done it is precisely because of Scotland. And I think that's quite sad, to be quite honest. Look, politics is brutal, and politicians often have very strongly held differences of opinion. But when they do agree, I really, really, really think it is a good thing for our democracy. Why not? This idea that it's all some sort of conspiracy if a left wing figure happens to agree with a right wing figure in a particular area, oh, they must be part of the Illuminati or they're all in it together. It's absurd. There is a certain obnoxious attitude from both left and right, and this is where, as a centrist, I'm going to express my unease. On the right and on the Leave side, not that it is simple as left and right, but I'll just say that there is an ugly undercurrent of genuine racism. And this is irrefutable. When reporters go around the country and they go to um, especially old Labour strongholds, you do get outright racism. You get people in full view of the camera and they don't care, saying, "Oh, it's all the immigrants coming over here. We need to kick them out." I'm not exaggerating. You genuinely get those sort of sentiments, and that's really unfortunate. But by the same token, there is a liberal elite, and it's sort of like this cosmopolitan, educated, liberal elite that tend to live in big cities, especially in London, and they do really look down on people who have different views from them. And they do live in something of a bubble because they don't see, they're not experiencing life in a deprived area. They're not experiencing what it is like, in a town like Boston. So I think in their own way, they're just as narrow. They think they're being very open-minded. They're in their own way, they're just as narrow and and there's a certain pompous arrogance to their outlook. Um, Now, as a centrist, I like to think I am somewhere in the middle, and I'm no prophet. I don't know everything, and there's been occasions where I've been wrong, and I've said so. So, as a centrist, I have sympathies on the left. I have sympathies on the right. Perhaps nothing in British politics has been as divisive as this referendum, including even the Scottish referendum, because at least that was restrained to Scotland. This really has divided the country. And as a centrist, I want to be optimistic. I want to try and think, well, there's areas I agree with both Leave and Remain, but unfortunately, what I'm seeing is a lot of ugly sentiments, and it would be nice if members of the public could just for once stand up and say, well, actually, I agree with this politician, and actually that we welcome politicians working together. Now, in terms of what's going to happen, to my international viewers, I want to reassure you, none of this is going to happen overnight. So if you're French or German or Italian or Dutch or Hungarian and you're living in the UK, don't worry. This isn't going to happen overnight and you're not going to be kicked out. That is not going to happen. And most of us still welcome you. See you as our neighbours and our friends and our allies. It's not going to happen overnight. Please, please don't think that the minority of, granted they're vocal, but they are a minority of people who are being hostile. Don't think they represent all of us. Um, there is a lot happening, and none of this is going to happen overnight. One of the big issues, of course, is Ireland. Northern Ireland has is in now a tight spot. Sinn Féin is calling for a referendum on a united Ireland. Sturgeon's pushing for a referendum on a second Scottish referendum. She's going to find that the European Union isn't going to just allow in. I mean, how can they? They can't just say, "Oh well, Scotland voted Remain, so we're just going to let you in," even though as a political entity, as a home nation of the United Kingdom, you're still part of the United Kingdom. So the EU isn't stupid. They're not going to just let in Scotland because Nicola Sturgeon asked them to. Um, they know that will complicate trade negotiations with the Greater United Kingdom. Um, so none of this is going to happen overnight. We need to take stock of things and calm down a little bit. The UK has not imploded. We have not sunk into the North Sea. We've not drifted off into the Atlantic. We're still very much here. And I think for the next few years at least, we're going to travel with as normal, as before. I don't think it's going to be a case that suddenly there's going to be passport visa checks on whenever we go on holiday to Rome or Budapest or Warsaw or Paris. Um, I think it's going to take time for all of that to take hold. And this may not be the end. There may well be a second referendum. Personally, I can't see where that would lead, but there is definitely political willpower in London to stop this happening. David Lammy, the old Labour MP, is calling for Parliament to block this, bearing in mind the majority of politicians want us to stay in. Anything could happen. It's going to be a very, very turbulent few months and 2 years. Uh, if I were David Cameron, after going to Brussels this week, after this 3 month period, I would just put my feet up. And this man has been through such a turbulent tenure as prime minister. He deserves a rest, a big rest. Um, this will not be the last video I make on this subject. I'm sure I'll have other things to say. This is just a very overwhelmed centrist voicing his views on what has been a very complex event. Thank you for watching.